Due to recent political unrest, SecCom has decided to send several colony ships out to promising new worlds with rudimentary blink gates, hoping this show of progress will distract dissenters from their blunders. Y'all have been selected as potential Lancers, pilots in training who can supplement the accompanying troops and exploration corps respectively to hop on board the James McAllen. SecCom doesn't want to send all of the best pilots, so a few good ones can be counted on to train you, the players. For good measure, we're sending an NHP, non-human person, to train our prospective pilots during the journey. Welcome to the campaign diary, folks. This is the session 0 of my White Noise campaign using the Lancer system. We know what's on everyone's minds, but trust us, there's no need to send more experienced pilots on a frontier expedition like this. The efficiency and due diligence for which SecCom is known has yet again saved precious resources for the good of humanity. Enter our fearless new pilots who've been woken up from cryosleep yet again to engage in training. This has happened 3 times before in what the players think are 300-year intervals. These intervals are overseen by the onboard NHP Sadie. The crew wakes up, says hello, and is greeted by Sadie's hologram, which introduces itself as White Noise. White Noise informs the party she's prepared a meal for them. 300 years have passed since the prior wake-up, and she has a few tasks for the party. The crew runs down to the mess hall and are greeted by 3D printed steaks, pork ribs, some broccoli, mashed potatoes, and fresh baked bread. The dough was printed before it was baked. While the players ate, they asked questions about the journey and tried to refresh their characters' memory about the campaign prep they received. This is excellent play and the perfect setup for me because I took a risk and immediately began feeding them information from White Noise that contradicted information they'd received in their mission brief and from Sadie prior. Now, this is risky because you might disorient the players so much that there's no real campaign to grab onto. I lost a player ostensibly due to scheduling issues, so it's possible this was the case, but if it works, the players are a little off-kilter and are more or less primed for mystery. They buy into the premise, and the premise of mystery is that there's always some new clue or juicy detail to find around the corner. It's amazing for campaign momentum. White Noise's dialogue was the first of these juicy details. So for example, the NHP's name is Sadie, but it introduces itself as White Noise and corrects the players when they refer to her as Sadie. Our pilots are just trainees, so as to avoid taking too many advanced pilots from the ranks of SecCom, because, they need those to quell political dissent. But White Noise keeps referring to the pilots as the only pilots of the vessel. Long-range sensors indicated the planet was a jungle world with a vast subterranean cave network, but according to White Noise, there's a massive ocean on one side of the planet now. The players asked a lot of details about the planet's natural resources, which White Noise says the players have asked Sadie during past intervals. She claims Sadie denied the request based on the details being classified, but White Noise is happy to oblige. White Noise mentions classified information a few times, stating emergency procedures permit her to reveal them, but also that she's choosing to reveal some information. Now, the pilots are supposed to wake up in 300-year intervals, and this is interval number 4 according to player memory and what White Noise tells them. But when the players ask White Noise how long they've been on the voyage, she doesn't respond with the obvious answer, but rather states that the information is classified. Speaking of travel time, the final stretch of the approach to the planet has arrived. White Noise informs the pilots they must find a crash couch, which is a seating area for personnel to avoid getting killed by sudden changes in speed, especially the kind of changes you would suffer or undergo in interstellar travel. They settle into the mess hall's crash couch and prepare themselves. One of the players, demonstrating an aptitude for preparation and understanding of the local game environment, commands Sadie, incorrect, to provide an audible countdown for deceleration, and White Noise complies. 1. Well, the party isn't feeling great, having just eaten a full meal right before experiencing more G-forces than ever before, and likely ever will again in their lifetimes. But White Noise wastes no time, taking the players into a combat simulation. Well, we ran our first practice combat during this session, which was held in the ship's wargames deck. I just tossed a few archers versus the players. Archers are an NPC template that's focused on fire suppression and fire control. They suppress targets, making it a little bit more difficult to move and a little bit more difficult to hit things, and when the players move around, they can use a reaction to attack the players again. So it's a very good, to my mind, it's a very good tutorial enemy. And the players did pretty good. I gave them walls to hide behind and maneuver around. The players killed 2 or so archers to start with, and then we started coming up on the reason I chose the simulation wargame style to get the players ready. See, I'm not just running the players through a combat tutorial. The ship's AI is running their characters through a combat tutorial. It can change the conditions of the test, introduce the players to mechanics I'd like them to encounter in a safe environment first, if that makes sense. And the ship's AI is obviously echoing my sentiments. Its job is to train them, to prepare them for the new world. This AI NPC is perhaps the most aligned with me, the referee, in terms of goals, desires, and emotional status, if that makes sense. So it takes the players through the loss of structure, which is a mechanic that you interact with when you reach 0 hit points. So the AI sets everybody's hit points to 0. Their hit points reset. Some of them lose structure, everybody loses structure, but some folks lose systems, some folks lose... I don't think anybody lost a weapon mount. I don't think anybody took additional damage or anything like that. A few people, I think at least 2 players, suffered from the exposed condition, which meant that they were going to take double damage, pretty much. A few dead archers later, White Noise sets their heat past their heat caps, which causes stress. Stress happens when your reactor starts malfunctioning or losing structural integrity because you exceeded your heat cap. Structure and stress have plenty of similar effects, and the players got to experience the real consequences of both in a combat, without any real risk to themselves. Now, I didn't have the NPCs lose structure, because they only have 1 structure, but I did make them take reactor stress for the hell of it, just to simulate what it can do to NPCs. That'll be especially important when the players begin stuffing their enemies full of heat. In fact, I'm going to pat myself on the back a little bit more. I will be making this standard for all of my sci-fi games, and maybe some of my fantasy games as well. Being able to experience consequences, mechanical penalties, death spirals, in an environment with no real threat to the characters is brilliant. This isn't actually bragging. This intensity in my voice right now, I'm upset with myself for not having done it sooner. I know when I first encountered the idea, by the way, in fantasy. I first encountered it in Steven Erickson's Malzahn series. I think it was the 2nd book, features an illusionist mage who's attached to an army, and what does he do whenever they're not fighting? Well, he trains the army with his illusions. Of course, why would you not do that? How about sci-fi? It was either Titanfall or Halo 4. Halo 4 established the PvP modes of all Halo games were actually taking place in a holodeck-like structure inside the UNSC Infinity. It was such a cool idea. I'm glad that ship is still around. Anyways, Titanfall has the Wargames map, which loads up in a combat map in what's very clearly a simulation pod. The Titanfall series has a few other obvious simulations, one of which is the tutorial mission for Titanfall 2. Now, one of our players who ended up dropping from the campaign did have to leave early, but we finished up the combat in the next round or so, and Lancer characters are not terribly difficult to run for the referee. This meant that we could transition to downtime action. Unlike many other games I play and have to invent this mechanic for, Lancer comes complete with its own system of downtime actions, and this is a great time for White Noise to explain an emergency presently affecting the Macallan, as the pilots have, as she puts it, passed certification, ensuring all pilots are paying attention before she begins. 12 years ago, a single metal object made contact with the colony ship's outer shell while traveling through the nebula Sierra X3. A rise of background radiation was detected, but the object was filed as a possibly a derelict spacecraft, and logged for investigation on orbital approach. No activity was detected on outer hull cameras, but shielding on these cameras progressively degraded to emergency levels over the next 2 years, and were retracted for repair on arrival. 15 seconds after hull cameras were successfully retracted, power was immediately drawn from the local modules, including the vessel's reverse thrusters. My attempt to reroute power to the reverse thrusters was only partially successful. Good news, the partial success has expanded our range for a course correction. If power is restored within the next week, we will not miss our planetary system or crash. This entity lacks an identifiable power source, despite the fact it's clearly drawing from the vessel. Cameras and automated defenses in the area have been disabled, but a manual reroute could restore the systems, if done locally. The hull is magnetized by the local draw of power, so pilots will be able to reliably operate their mechs without floating off. EVA modules are still recommended for pilots operating in a vacuum. Deployment is in 2 days. Now, the pilots set about their downtime actions, and downtime in Lancer is a little bit funky to where you basically have to get above a 10 to get a partial success, or above a 20 to get a full success, and lots of times a partial success basically means you don't accomplish the thing that you're looking for in this particular downtime. You're gonna have to wait for the next downtime action. So the pilot set about, and our player Joe decided he wanted to hack the ship's systems to recover more information about the entity. This is my answer to him, and I judged based off his total success that he'd be able to access some additional information within the Macallan systems. Now initially, he decided to look up information on the planet, but changed his mind. Joe wants information on Sadie. These are the results of his investigation. First up, LiDAR and radar buoys launched along the vessel's bow indicated the entity has a vaguely humanoid shape, size 2, with 4 arms and 4 legs. The entity appears capable of common electronic warfare attacks, evidenced not just by the E-War warnings prompted by the buoy sensors, but also clear rootkit interference when attempting to access data on the entity, which prompted several lockouts from the vessel's database. But before data concerning the entity was closed off, Joe's character was able to record a few direct observations of its architecture or physiology, whichever term best applies remains to be seen. The ship's cameras recorded impact with an interstellar meteor cloud. While the ship's defenses took care of most of it, the low power of top hull turrets let several projectiles slip through, punching holes into the entity. These holes appear to have closed, but only after a period of siphoning extra power from the vessel, exact duration unknown due to data corruption. Finally, the entity looks to have constructed a nest-like structure from a similar metal that composes itself at the ship's front after this event. Coincidentally, there looks to be another meteor cloud up ahead estimated to hit during the deployment window. I wonder if that'll have an impact on anything. As for Sadie, there are even more juicy details. It looks like Sadie's shackles, the electronic architecture that keeps an NHP embodied and relatively sane within our reality, have been partially absorbed by the mechanical entity on top of the hull. That bears probably a little bit of explanation for folks who are not familiar with Lancer. NHPs are not true artificial intelligence. NHPs are intelligences, entities, things, beings from another dimension, or really just an unidentified source that happen to really like the architecture of computers. And the architecture of computers is very handy for keeping them bound, literally shackled in our reality, so they can act as an artificial intelligence. They fill the ecological niche of an artificial intelligence, but they do have their own instincts that necessarily can't be coded for. I don't know how to explain that. They're weird. They're like demons in the Greek sense of the word. Now, there's an emergency protocol in Sadie's architecture allowing her to set new mission parameters and disobey certain time-gated mission objectives to preserve the ship's safety. Sadie, now white noise, has been feeding this entity small packets of information, her code, and has been for at least 300 years. Recall Sadie has said this thing impacted the hull 12 years ago. Flight data has been heavily corrupted, but some artifacts you attempt to restore suggest that McAllen did pass through the nebula 12 years ago, but there are another set of more complete files suggesting that too was around 300 years ago. Now, the last time the players were woken up, they weren't in visual range of the Sierra X3 Nebula. Well, folks, I always wanted to do a campaign diary, but campaign diaries in a West Marches or Grand Campaign are a tad too difficult for me, at least at the moment when I spend so much time writing already. This ain't so bad. But be sure to like and subscribe, and if you all want to join this campaign, we still have 2 seats open. Just head into our Discord or join the campaign on Start Playing Games. Thanks y'all. Peace.